Hi friends, welcome back to the new video. As you are already aware that in this channel we make educational and informative videos. In this series we are making video series on famous personalities' life stories and biographies. Students can make notes for their projects and homeworks, looking at the text from the screen. Other viewers can enjoy the interesting life stories as all stories have a moral hidden in them, and it helps us knowing history and gaining general knowledge. Right now in front of your video screen, you can see the text of my narration. So when I narrate the story, I advise you to read the text along with me, but in your mind. So you have to listen my narration and at the same time you have to read it from your video screen in your mind. This process of listening and reading at the same time helps us to understand more clearly, and most important, it helps us remembering. Today's video, as mentioned on the thumbnail, is on Abraham Lincoln, the person who is admired for his effective management skills. He was a great lawyer and politician. So before we begin, if you are new to this channel, do subscribe the channel for more updates and upcoming videos. Let's begin the video. Abraham Lincoln Biography and Life Story. Introduction to Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States and is regarded as one of America's greatest heroes due to his role as a savior of the Union and emancipator of slaves. His rise from humble beginnings to achieving the highest office in the land is a remarkable story. Lincoln died at a time when his country needed him to complete the great task remaining before the nation. His eloquent support and democracy and insistence that the Union was worth saving embody the ideas of self-government that all nations strive to achieve. Lincoln's distinctively human and humane personality and incredible impact on the nation have endowed him with an enduring legacy. Abraham Lincoln was born on Feb 12, 1809 in the single-room log cabin, Hardin County of Kentucky. His family upbringing was modest. His parents from Virginia were neither wealthy or well-known. At an early age, the young Abraham lost his mother and his father moved away to Indiana. Abraham had to work hard splitting logs and other manual labor, but he also had a thirst for knowledge and worked very hard to excel in his studies. This led him to become the self-trained as a lawyer. One of his Abraham Lincoln's quotes, "With malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds." Let's see about Abraham Lincoln's family. Abraham Lincoln was born to Thomas Lincoln and Nancy Hanks Lincoln. Thomas was a strong and determined pioneer who found a moderate level of prosperity and was well respected in the community. The couple had two other children, Abraham's older sister Sarah and younger brother Thomas, who died in infancy. When young Abraham was 9 years old, his mother died of treacle milk sickness at age 34. On October 5, 1818, the event was devastating to him, and young Abraham grew more alienated from his father and quietly resented the hard work placed on him at early age. In December 1819, just over a year after his mother's death, Lincoln's father Thomas married Sarah Bush Johnston, a Kentucky widow with 3 children of her own. She was a strong and affectionate woman with whom Abraham quickly bonded. Childhood and education of Abraham Lincoln. The Lincolns were forced to move from Abraham's birthplace of Kentucky to Perry County, Indiana, due to a land dispute in 1817. There the family squatted on public land to scrap out a living in crude shelter, hunting game and farming a small plot. Abraham's father was eventually able to buy the land. Though both his parents were most likely illiterate, Thomas' new wife Sarah encouraged Abraham to read. It was while growing into manhood that Abraham Lincoln received his formal education, an estimated total of 18 months, a few days or weeks at a time. Reading material was in short supply in the Indiana wilderness. Neighbors recalled how Abraham would walk for miles to borrow a book. He undoubtedly read the family Bible and probably other popular books at that time, such as Robinson Crusoe, Pilgrim's Progress, and Aesop Fables. In March 1830, the family again migrated, this time to Macon County of Illinois. When his father moved the family again to Coles County, 22 years old Abraham Lincoln struck out on his own, making a living in manual labor. At 6 feet 4 inches tall, Lincoln was raw-boned and lanky, but muscular and physically strong. He spoke with a backwoods twang and walked with long straighted gait. He was known for his skill in welding an axe, and early on made a living splitting wood for fire and rail fencing. Young Abraham Lincoln eventually migrated to a small community, New Salem, Illinois, where over a period of years he worked as a shopkeeper, postmaster, and eventually general store owner. It was there that Lincoln working with the public, acquired social skills and honed storytelling talent that made him popular with the locals. When the Black Hawk War broke out in 1832 between the United States and Native Americans, the volunteers in the area elected Lincoln to be their captain. He saw no combat during this time, save for a good many bloody struggles with the mosquitoes, but was able to make several important political connections. Here in this photo we can see Abraham Lincoln's birth house. As you must be aware, as told before, Abraham Lincoln has brought up in humble beginnings. Children and wife of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was married to Mary Todd on November 4, 1842. Todd was a high-spirited, well-educated woman for a distinguished Kentucky family. When the couple became engaged in 1840, many of their friends and family couldn't understand Mary's attraction. At times, Lincoln questioned it himself. In 1841, the engagement was suddenly broken off, most likely at Lincoln's initiative. Mary and Abraham met later at a social function and eventually married in 1842. The couple had 4 children, of which only one, Robert, survived to adulthood. Here you can see a pattern in which, in olden times, whenever the kids were born, because of lack of medical treatments and other medical medicines, the survival rate of the infants and the kids was very less. So in the olden times there was a tendency of producing more babies, so at least some will survive till their adulthood. Before marrying to Todd, Lincoln was involved with other potential matches. Around 1837, he purportedly met and became romantically involved with Annie Rutledge before they had a chance to be engaged. A wave of typhoid fever came over New Salem and Annie died at age 22. Her death was said to have left Lincoln severely depressed. However, several historians disagree on the extent of Lincoln's relationship with Rutledge, and his level of sorrow at her death may be more the makings of legend. About a year after the death of Rutledge, Lincoln courted Mary Owens. The two saw each other for a few months and marriage was considered, but in time Lincoln called off the match. Here is Abraham Lincoln's photo in his youth. He spent 8 years working on the Illinois court circuit. His ambition, drive, and capacity for hard work were evident to all around. Lincoln became respected on the legal circuit and he gained the nickname Honest Abe. He often encouraged neighbors to mediate their own conflicts rather than pursue full legal litigation. Lincoln also had a good sense of humor and was depreciating about his looks. If I were two-faced, would I be wearing this one? Work colleagues and friends noted that Lincoln had a capacity to diffuse tense and argumentative situations. Though the use of humor and his capacity to take an optimistic view of human nature, he loved to tell stories to illustrate a serious point through the use of humor and parables. And this is the skill which every leader in the world have. Lincoln was shy around women, but after a difficult courtship, he married Mary Todd in 1842. Mary Todd shared many of her husband's political thinking, but they also had different temperaments. With Mary more prone to swings in her emotions, they had 4 children, as said before, who Lincoln was devoted to. Although 3 died before reaching maturity, which caused much grief to both parents. Lincoln as a lawyer and politician. In 1834, Abraham Lincoln began his political career and was elected to Illinois state legislature as a member of the Whig Party. It was around this time that he decided to become a lawyer, teaching himself the law by reading William Blackstone's commentaries on the laws of England. As we have seen in the case of Thomas Jefferson as well, that in those days there were no special school for learning law, or there was no special time allotted in which you have to study the course. But people used to learn it from the fellow lawyers or by studying on their own in the law book, from the law books, and then they used to give the exam for the bar. So these were the times when laws were studied in this way in England. After being admitted to the bar in 1837, he moved to Springfield, Illinois and began to practice in the John T. Stewart law firm. In 1844, Abraham Lincoln partnered with William Harrington in the practice of law. Though they two had different jurisprudence styles, they developed a close professional and personal relationship. Lincoln made a good living in his early years as a lawyer, but found that Springfield alone didn't offer enough work, so to supplement his income, he followed the court as it made its rounds on the circuit to various county seats in Illinois. Abraham Lincoln served a single term in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1847 to 1849. His foray into national politics seemed to be unremarkable, as it was brief. He was the lone Whig from the state of Illinois, showing party loyalty, but finding few political allies, he used his term in office to speak against the Mexican-American War and supported Zachary Taylor for president in 1848. His criticism of the war made him unpopular back home, and he decided not to run for second term, but instead returned to Springfield to practice law. By the 1850s, the railroad industry was moving west, and Illinois found itself becoming a major hub for various companies. Abraham Lincoln served as lobbyist for the Illinois Central Railroad as its company attorney. Success in several court cases brought other business clients as well: banks, insurance companies, and manufacturing firms. Lincoln also did some criminal trials. In one case, a witness claimed that he would identify Lincoln's client, who was accused of murder because of the intense light from a full moon. Lincoln referred to an almanac and proved that the night in question had been too dark for the witness to see anything clearly. His client was acquitted. Lincoln's view on slavery. As a member of the Illinois State Legislature in 1834, Lincoln supported the Whig politics of government-sponsored infrastructure and protective tariffs. This political understanding led him to formulate his early views on slavery, not so much as moral wrong, but as an impediment to economic development. As I have discussed with earlier personalities of those times, slavery was a common practice in most of the places. People used to keep slaves for working in the farms or for working in the day-to-day places. People used to import the slaves from the less privileged countries to America, and then they used to keep them in the slavery. So people like Lincoln have major role to play against the slavery. In 1854, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which repealed the Missouri Compromise, allowed individual states and territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. The law provoked violent opposition in Kansas and Illinois. It gives rise to the Republican Party. This awkward Abraham Lincoln's political zeal once again his views on slavery moved more towards indignation. Lincoln joined the Republican Party in 1856. In 1857, the Supreme Court issued its controversial Dred Scott decision declaring African Americans were not citizens and had no inherent rights. Though Abraham Lincoln felt African Americans were not equal to whites, he believed America's founders intended that all men were created with certain inalienable rights. Lincoln decided to challenge sitting U.S. Senator Stephen Douglas for his seat. In his nomination acceptance speech, he criticized Douglas, the Supreme Court, and President James Buchanan for promoting slavery and declared House divided cannot stand. During Lincoln's 1858 Senate campaign against Douglas, he participated in 7 debates held in different cities across Illinois. The two candidates didn't disappoint the public, giving stirring debates on issues ranging from state rights to Western expansion, but the central issue was slavery. Newspapers' intense covered the debates, oftentimes with partisan commentary. In the end, the state legislature elected Douglas, but the exposure vaulted Lincoln's into politics. Lincoln's election to the presidency. In 1860, political operatives in Illinois organized a campaign to support Abraham Lincoln for the presidency. On May 18 at the Republican National Convention in Chicago, Lincoln surpassed better-known candidates such as William Seward of New York and Salmon P. Chase of Ohio. Lincoln's nomination was due in part to his modest views on slavery, his support for improving the national infrastructure, and the protective tariff. In the general election, Lincoln faced his friend and rival, Stephen Douglas, this time besting him in a 4-way race that included John C. Breckinridge of the Northern Democrats and John Bell of the Constitution Party. Lincoln received not quite 40% of the popular vote, but carried 180 of 303 electoral votes. Lincoln's cabinet. Following his election to the presidency in 1860, Abraham Lincoln selected a strong cabinet composed of many of his political rivals, including William Seward, Salmon P. Chase, Edward Bates, and Edwin Stanton. Formed out the adage, "Hold your friends close and your enemies closer." Lincoln's cabinet became one of the strongest assets in his first term in office, and he would need them with the start of the Civil War the following year. The quote which I said just now, like "hold your friends close and your enemies closer," is seen following by most of the leaders of the world who are successful in today's life. Lawyer. As a lawyer, Abraham developed a capacity for quick thinking and oratory. His interest in public issues encouraged him to stand for public office. In 1847, he was elected to the House of Representatives for Illinois and served from 1847 to 49. During his period in Congress, Lincoln criticized President Polk's handling of the American-Mexican War, arguing Polk used patriotism and military glory to defend the unjust action of taking Mexican territory. However, Lincoln's stance was politically unpopular and he was not re-elected. After his political career appeared to be over, he returned to working as lawyer in Illinois. However, the 1850s saw the slavery question re-emerge as a prominent divisive national issue. Lincoln abhorred slavery and from political perspective wished to prevent slavery being extended and ultimately be phased out. He gave influential speeches which drew on the Declaration of Independence to prove the Founding Fathers had intended to stop the spread of slavery. In particular, Lincoln used novel argument that although society was long way from equality, America should aspire towards the lofty statement in the Declaration of Independence. As it's quoted, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal." Lincoln had a strong capacity for empathy. He would try to see problems from every point of view, including Southern slaveholders. He used this concept of empathy to speak against slavery. From his quotes, "I have always thought that all men should be free, but if any should be slaves, it should be first those who desire for themselves, and secondly, those who desire it for others. When I hear anyone arguing for slavery, I feel a strong impulse to see it tried on him personally." Lincoln's speeches were notable because they drew on both legal precedents but also easy to understand parables, which struck a chord with the public. And in oratorship, this is observed by many people who are in public service, being politicians. They are always tuned with the public and they make it sure that public understand them very well, and they should strike a chord with the public. In 1858, Lincoln was nominated as Republican candidate for the Senate. He undertook a series of high-profile debates with the Democratic incumbent Stephen Douglas. Douglas was in favor of allowing the extension of slavery. if citizens voted for it. Lincoln opposed the extension of slavery. During this campaign, he gave one of his best remembered speeches, which reflected on the divisive nature of America. When we see the people who are supporting slavery in those days, in today's times, we always wonder who were those people who supported the slavery. As this inhuman activity, how could it continue in the later days? This is always the question which I personally think. Coming to the quote, "A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently. Half slave and half free. I do not expect the union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house of fall, but I do expect it well. Cease to be divided, it will become all one thing or all the other." House divided. In this house divided speech, Lincoln gave prophetic utterance to the potential for slavery to divide the nation. Although he lost this 1858 Senate election, his debating skills and oratory caused him to become well known within the Republican Party. On February 27, 1860, Lincoln was also invited to give a notable address at Cooper Union in New York. The East Coast was relatively new territory for Lincoln. Many in the audience, though, thought his appearance awkward and even ugly. But his calls for moral clarity or the wrongness of slavery struck a chord with his East Coast audience. Quotes from Cooper Union address: "Let's have faith that right makes might, and in that faith let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it." The reputation he gained on campaign trail and speeches on the East Coast caused him to put forward as a candidate for Republican nominee for president in 1860. Lincoln was an outsider because he had much less experience than other leading campaign candidates such as Stewart, Bates, and Chase. But after finishing second on the first ballot, he went on to become unexpectedly nominated. After a hard-fought divisive campaign of 1860, Lincoln was elected the first Republican president of the United States. Lincoln's support came entirely from the north and west of the country. The South strongly disagreed with Lincoln's position on slavery. The election of Lincoln as president in 1861 sparked the South to secede from the North. Southern independence sentiment had been growing for many years, and the election of president opposed to slavery was the final straw. However, Lincoln resolutely opposed the breakaway of the South, and this led to America's Civil War, with Lincoln's committed to preserving the Union. Lincoln surprised many by including in his cabinet the main rivals from the 1860 Republican campaign. It demonstrated Lincoln's willingness and ability to work with people of different political and personal approaches. This helped to keep the Republican Party together. As said in his other quotes, he always keep the friends closest, but enemies closer. So he always keep his opponents and rivals closer. The Civil War was much more costly than many people anticipated, and at times Lincoln appeared to be losing the support of the general population. But Lincoln's patient leadership and willingness to work with Unionist Democrats held the country together. Lincoln oversaw many of the military aspects of the war and promoted the General Ulysses S. Grant to command the northern forces. Initially, the war was primarily about the secession of southern states and survival of the Union. But as the war progressed, Lincoln increasingly made the issues of ending slavery paramount. On September 22, 1862, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation that declared the freedom of slaves within the Confederacy. From the quote from Emancipation Proclamation: "All persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then henceforth and forever free." The proclamation came into force on January 1, 1863. Towards the end of the year, many black regiments were raised to help the Union Army. Lincoln Emancipation Proclamation. On January 1, 1863, Lincoln delivered the Emancipation Proclamation, reshaping the cause of the Civil War from saving the Union to abolishing slavery. The Union Army's first year and a half of battle defeats made it difficult to keep up morale and support strong for the reunification of the nation, and the Union victory at Antietam on September 22, 1862, while by no means conclusive, was hopeful, giving Lincoln confidence to officially change the goals of the war. Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation stated that all individuals who were held as slaves in the rebellious state henceforward shall be free. The action was more symbolic than effective because the North didn't control any states in rebellion, and the proclamation didn't apply to border states, Tennessee or some Louisiana parishes. Gettysburg Address. After a difficult opening 2 years by 1863, the tide of war started to swing towards the Union forces. Helped by the victory of the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863, Lincoln felt about to redefine the goals of the Civil War to include the ending of slavery. Dedicating the ceremony at Gettysburg on November 19, 1863, Lincoln declared, "407 years ago, our fathers brought forth of this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedication to the proposition that all men are created equal, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth." This was the quote of Abraham Lincoln, Gettysburg Address, November 19, 1863. Eventually, after 4 years of attrition, the federal forces secured the surrender of the defeated South. The Union had been saved, and the issue of slavery had been brought to head. Gettysburg Address. On November 19, 1863, Lincoln delivered that would become the most famous speech and was one of the most important speeches in American history, the Gettysburg Address. Addressing a crowd of around 15,000 people, Lincoln delivered his 272-word speech at one of the bloodiest battlefields of the Civil War, the National Cemetery of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. The Civil War, Lincoln said, was the ultimate test of the preservation of the Union created in 1776, and the lead at Gettysburg fought to uphold this case. Lincoln evoked the Declaration of Independence, saying it was up to the living to ensure that the government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. This quote, "Government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth," became very famous, and also it was adopted by some other countries as well. And this union was dedicated to proposition that all men are created equal. A common interpretation was that the president was expanding the cause of the Civil War from simple reunifying the Union to also fighting for equality and abolishing slavery. After the Civil War, in the aftermath of Civil War, Lincoln sought to reunite the country, offering a generous settlement to the South. When asked how to deal with Southern states, Lincoln replied, "Let them up easy." Lincoln was opposed by many more radical factions who wanted greater activism in the South to ensure civil rights for freed slaves. On January 31, 1865, Lincoln helped pass through Congress a bill to outlaw slavery. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution was officially signed into law on December 6, 1865. Some Northern abolitionists and Republicans wanted Lincoln to go further and implement full racial equality on issues of education and voting rights. Lincoln was unwilling to do this. It was a minority political view for the time. Frederick Douglass, a leading black activist who had escaped from slavery, didn't always agree with the policies of Lincoln, but after meeting Lincoln, he said enthusiastically on the president. He quotes, "He treated me as a man. He did not let me feel for a moment that there was any difference in the color or of our skins. The president is a more remarkable man. I'm satisfied now that he is doing all the circumstances will permit him to do." In the Civil War. Before Lincoln's inauguration in March 1861, 7 southern states had declared or have seceded from the Union, and by April, the U.S. military installation Fort Sumter was under siege in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina. In the early morning hours of April 12, 1861, the guns stationed to protect the harbor blazed towards the fort, signaling the start of America's costliest and most deadly war. Abraham Lincoln responded to the crisis wielding powers as no other president before him. He distributed $2 million for the Treasury for war material without an appropriation from Congress. He called for 75,000 volunteers into military service without a declaration of war, and he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, arresting and imprisoning suspected Confederate sympathizers without a warrant. Crushing the rebellion would be difficult under any circumstances, but the Civil War, with its preceding decades of white-hot partisan politics, was especially onerous from all directions. Lincoln faced disagreement and defiance. He was often at odds with his generals, his cabinet, his party, and a majority of the American people. Following Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, the war effort gradually improved from north, though more by attrition than by brilliant military victories. But by 1864, the Confederation armies had eluded major defeat, and Lincoln was convinced he'd be one-term president. His namesake, George B. McClellan, the former commander of the army at the Potomac, challenged him for his presidency, but the contest wasn't even close. Lincoln received 55% of the popular vote and 212 of 243 electoral votes. This was a good success. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Virginia, surrendered his forces to Union General Ulysses Grant, and the war, for all intents and purposes, was over. Reconstruction has already begun during the Civil War, as early as 1863 in areas formerly under Union military control, and Lincoln was favored a policy of quick reunification with minimum of retribution. He was confronted by a radical group of Republicans in the Senate and House that wanted complete allegiance and repentance from former Confederates. Before a political battle had a chance to firmly develop, Lincoln was assassinated. Abraham Lincoln's assassination. Abraham Lincoln was shot on April 14, 1865 by well-known actor and Confederate sympathizer John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. He was taken to the Peterson House across the street and laid in coma for 9 hours before dying the next morning. His body lay in state at the Capitol before a funeral train took him back to his final resting place in Springfield, Illinois. Assassination. 5 days after surrender of Robert E. Lee and Confederate Army, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth while visiting Ford's Theater. Lincoln's death was widely mourned across the country. Posterity. Lincoln is widely regarded as one of America's most influential and important presidents, as well as saving the Union and promoting Republican values. Lincoln was viewed as embodying the ideas of honesty and integrity. Let's see some of the known and unknown facts of Abraham Lincoln. A former Whig Party member, Lincoln joined the Republican Party in 1856. Lincoln's son Robert Todd Lincoln was saved from getting hit by a train by Edwin Booth, John Wilkes Booth's brother. Lincoln was an accomplished wrestler. Yes, you are hearing that right. He was defeated only once in about 300 matches and is enshrined in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. So this was the story of Abraham Lincoln, the life story of the man who until his end of life worked for the country and left remarkable legacy which is still remembered by all Americans. He inspired people from all walks of life and gave whole and soul for the task. It is said, enjoy your life to fullest, do your duties as wisest, use your knowledge to fullest, and use your resources as wisest. With this note, do like this video as it motivates me in making more such stories. Do share this video with your near and dear ones. Do comment your thoughts on this topic, or if you have any suggestions for me, do let me know as well. And do subscribe for upcoming videos, as you will be getting the notification for the upcoming videos whenever I post it. I usually do daily one story. It can be the biography and the life story, or it can be other kind of stories. So currently I'm doing the series on the biographies and life stories of the famous people. So stay tuned, and for the students, you can copy the notes from the screen, as whenever I am narrating, you can reverse and see the video again and get your notes done. I thank you all of you very much, and I pray that you will be having a successful day ahead. Have a nice day.